Well, we're back for 0-0-2. We had enough of a response to suggest that there might be an appetite out there for some people listening to some more sports dribble and absolute nonsense. So we're back and we've expanded our cast. So we're looking forward to getting into things, and we're going to pull apart a number of sports today. We're going to have a look at a little bit of boxing, a little bit of UFC, a little bit of cricket, and of course some football and round ball getting into it. But we're better to start than with the Biffs and the Tszyu fight, if you can call it that.
But just what's going through your mind?
What the f*** just happened? Like, what did I get hit with? And couldn't regroup, and I don't know, man. Just shit doesn't go your way, and you just have to bounce back, you know. Like, I was positive after the Fundora, but I got to find more answers with this one, you know. Like, this didn't go according to script. It was a little bit different. I felt unbelievable, I'll be honest with you. Felt unbelievable. I had a great prep. So he got me, man. And he was a better man on this night. And we live and we learn.
Well, Tszyu summed it up well there. And to recap it all and pull it apart, we are joined by podcaster, all-round out-there cat, and sports fan, Biffs aficionado, Brody Burrows.
Thanks, Chris, and love the name of the show, mate. You have to tell me later on how you came up with it.
Look, there was no marketing budget spared, that's for sure. Mate, speaking of budgets not spared, the Biffs, there's never budget spared when it comes to these big boxing fights. And I tell you what, if you spent your own hard-earned on the pay-per-view, you might be asking for a little bit back, and you're probably about as dejected as Tszyu looked in that post-fight press conference.
I think so, mate. And to quote Tim himself, I think the Australian public are thinking along the lines of him, what just happened? And look, it took 3 rounds, and his chance at the IBF title was completely gone. Coming back to it, I think you often see in boxing, mate, it's as much mental as it is physical. And you saw early on in that first round, there was a head clash, and I was talking to a few other guys on a live chat at the time, and immediately he put the gloves up to the top of his head and he checked to see if he was bleeding. And right then I saw, this is not the same Tszyu. He would march forward always in that first, second round. He'd take those hits and he'd keep rolling on. But as soon as he felt that head clash, he took 2 steps back, and I just thought, there's something not quite right about him. And to be fair, Murtazaliev, he was unstoppable. He's a big man. A lot of people after his last fight, I think they forget that, they were calling him slow after winning the title in the fight against Jack Kulkai. But he did that. He won in the 11th round, and he was during Ramadan. He fought during Ramadan during that time, which you don't see very often. So, Tszyu got a lot to work on after that, mate.
He certainly does. And, you touched on it there, and he touched on it in the interview. Murtazaliev was clearly the better fighter. Tszyu looked a little off. It was interesting to see, and you've pulled it apart really well there. Where does this lead to for Tszyu? We know that, he was on a very rapid and upward trajectory based on recent fights, but all of a sudden back to the drawing board?
Yeah, look, Terence Crawford had a little bit to say on Twitter straight afterwards, thinking that he probably looked past him a little bit, and whether that was Tim himself, whether that was the camp, probably a combination of both. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have picked that big monster to jump in the ring with straight after a loss like that. But look, do you go back to Australia? Do you stay over there and try and build up? I think the smartest thing for Tim to do right now is I think he's going to go back to Russia with Costa and just work on defense for a little bit before he jumps into anything further. He just needs to get back. And what made him so strong when he was here in Australia is he'd probably defend first. He might get chipped, maybe once or twice in the opening rounds, and then he'd start to work his way in. Whereas these last few American fights, he's really gone in early and tried to make a statement, and he's been clipped, whether that was accidentally with a head clash or with those heavy hits like we saw in his last fight. I think he's got to go back, and there's a funny saying in boxing that you box first, you punch later on in the fight. And I think that's what Tim has to get back to. Whether he comes back and fights, has that Zarafa fight, he's at him like a little Jack Russell. He's just barking at his leg at the moment. But I wouldn't be doing that. If I was him, I'd try to get another fight, maybe 6 months, have 6 months off, get right mentally, get right physically, and then come back in with a you call them gimme fights. It's an unranked opponent. Don't have to make a statement. Just get back to being the killer that we all know.
So, mate, you're talking about going to Russia. I'm envisaging some Rocky IV chasing chickens. Is that what we're thinking?
I think so. You look back and I think there's so many people talking about, Tim, he's been hyped up a lot, we know. But, if you look at his amateur record, he had 34 amateur fights. That's very low when it comes to, a professional sense. Look at his Tad Costa. He had close to 300 amateur fights before he turned pro. And even Terence Crawford, he was above 70. So I think he's still quite young. He's only 29 in his boxing career. I think he's got to go back and really get that defense in check if he is going to compete. And if he does want these big fights against the likes, of Terence, which that just seems a mile away now, if we're honest.
And there was talk just before this fight that he was going to book in this $10 million mega fight, go and fight in Las Vegas on the NRL Vegas weekend against Jamel Charlo. Surely that's $1 million to 1 to go ahead at this point, unless he can, turn things around rapidly. Like we're talking about, that's 4.5 months away.
Look, mate, I think you and I have the same amount of chances he does of getting back into a big fight with Charlo there. Look, we've got to look now. He's got no title. There's nothing that Tim has that's going to bring these big fights coming now. And until he gets that back, or I think he's probably even going to be outside the top 10. So he's going to have to work his way back up through points, through rankings, and it's going to be a slow rise. But I think that's going to be really good for Tim in his personal and his professional growth.
Well, based on that, I'm going to get my agent on the phone because I'm happy to take a 30% cut of the purse at $10 million to fight in Vegas. It'll be about as pretty as, actually it won't be even as pretty as what Tim dished up on the weekend, but hey, I'll take $3 million for a few punches in the face.
Oh, mate, I've done it for a hell of a lot less, so we might as well keep going.
Haven't we all on a footy field? Well, I guess it's back to the drawing board for Tim Tszyu. It's certainly going to be interesting to see what decisions he makes from here. But, Broads, we'll watch this space with bated breath. There's certainly going to be lots more Biff talk in terms of boxing to come over the next few months, both Tim and Nikita, plus plenty more, and we'll have you back for that. But, mate, we might close out the Tim Tszyu fight on that note, and we'll head on to some other pastures shortly. Let's move it on from biffs to biffs and grind on the ground inside the octagon. It is the UFC 308 coming up this weekend. It's going to be an interesting one. There's some titles on the line. There's an Aussie fighting as well, and we are certainly chomping at the bit for it. I'm going to be rejoined by our biffs aficionado, Brody Burrows. And Brody, there's really interesting clashes at the top of the card for this one.
There is, mate, and I'm so excited for this one. I'm actually going on a family holiday tomorrow, and the fight is 5 a.m. Adelaide time, and I'm actually going to be getting up and watching it on our family holiday. That's finally the UFC have put a good card together, not just one main event and 4 fillers. So really looking forward to this. Both main event and co-main event could headline their own show. So really looking forward to it, mate.
It's certainly interesting, and let's start. We'll do it in card order as we will, and let's start with Bobby Knuckles, Robert Whittaker, taking on Chimaev, and I've probably pronounced that incorrectly because my Russian is not that great. But a middleweight fight, we always get excited and get around when Bobby's up and fighting. The Aussie public love to get behind our UFC fighters. How do you rate his chances in this one? How do these two match up? His opponent's undefeated at this point.
He is, but the big thing on Chimaev, mate, whoever you talk to, whatever language they speak, everyone pronounces it differently. So you've done a pretty good job there. And the big thing about him, so when he absolutely burst onto the scene in this one, and I think he fought something like 6 times in 12 months when he first entered the UFC. And obviously Dana White, he was just taking fights all the time. Anyone was injured, he was the first one to jump in and just completely ragdoll them all around the cage. And Dana White just loved him because if someone pulled out, just chuck him in and he'll be fine. But then he got COVID and he's had this illness sort of surround him ever since, and he's only fought 4 times in the last 4 years, albeit every time he's done it, he's won in probably in dominant fashion until his last one against Kamaru Usman. And then that one there, he looked good, but he wasn't that dominant self where he was ragdolling people around the cage. And Kamaru Usman actually went up a weight class in that one to fight him. So that was probably one he should have dominated more. And had a lot of people asking questions, is this the same Chimaev that we saw 3 or 4 years ago? And I think you look at this one, and Bobby Knuckles, he's had a career resurgence. It's the second coming of him. A lot of people wrote him off, but if you look at his career, he's lost twice. Those people are Israel Adesanya, Dricus du Plessis, two of the best in the game. And I think you look at this one, and if Chimaev comes in with the same Chimaev that we saw when he burst onto the scene, he's going to ragdoll him. He's going to wrestle him down for 4, maybe 5 rounds. I don't see him get submitting Bobby Knuckles. He'll probably just he'll grind it out, knowing Bobby. I think in this one, I'd be going, if I was a betting man, 5 rounds. It's going to be a decision. But if Bobby can land him early and just pick off those legs, and that's the only way he's going to get close to it in this one for me. But big watch on the weigh-ins to see. I think from the weigh-ins, you're going to be able to see what sort of Khamzat you're going to see.
In terms of it from a non-fight fan and someone who's not as in-depth in the UFC as you are, the difference in time between their fights, you touched on it there with the health things. Like the Usman fight was over 12 months ago by the time we get the fight, by just over 12 months. It was last October. Before that, it was September last year. So realistically, we're just over 2 years for his last 2 fights. Whereas when we look at Bobby, he's had 2 fights this calendar year already. So does that make a difference or not really, because they just go into this prep state, whether they've fought, 6 months ago or 16 months ago?
I think when it comes down to Chimaev, we've seen in the past, he works harder than anyone in that fight camp. He says it himself that he wants to go as close as he can to dying in the fight camp before going to a fight. That's how crazy he is. And that's why he's had so many troubles with his health, because he goes to these lengths in the fight camp and then he often pulls out late. It's sometimes 1 or 2 weeks before the fight where he's been in this fight camp for, let's say 1 month, 2 months, or 1 or 2 months before. And then all of a sudden he'll get this illness. And because his body is just so wrecked from that last month of training that he's put in, he just goes down in a screaming heap. So if he rocks up and he's looking as fit as possible, he's a big man for the division. If he rocks up as fit as possible, gets through the weigh-in, I think Bobby might be in trouble, unfortunately.
That's not what we want to hear, mate. But let's head on to somewhere where we might like to hear a little bit more. 2 men who, again, Aussie UFC fans who've predominantly only watched Aussie fighters should know reasonably well. They've both come up in recent years up against our Volk. Unfortunately, one of these men in the reigning champion, Ilia Topuria, is the man who last defeated Volkanovski not that long ago in February. Comes up against Max Holloway, who is one of the more seasoned campaigners. He's been on the scene for coming up 15 years next year in terms of his UFC career, which is phenomenal. There's not many people that have lasted as long as he has. Very different records when you look at the numbers purely. Holloway's lost quite a few, including 3 to Volkanovski. Again, the last of those back in 2022. But this is going to be an interesting one. Holloway's certainly not someone who's going to die wondering in this fight.
Yeah, the BMF belt holder he is after that unbelievable knockout against Justin Gaethje in that last one. If you're not a fight fan, but you do love a bit of biff, go back and watch it. It was the best finish. So Holloway had actually dominated this fight. He'd won 4 rounds at that stage, and he called Gaethje to the middle of the octagon in the last 10 seconds and said, let's just throw haymakers at each other and see who's still standing after, which he didn't have to do, which you'd never see. And he's done that with 1 second to go. He's knocked him out in one of the most dramatic, most vicious knockouts you'll ever see. But then on the other side of the octagon this weekend, you're going to see Topuria, and he's a dead set sniper, this bloke. Like, he slept Volkanovski. He was a champion when he went to sleep, and he's woken up as an actor. I'm not sure about you, mate, but I've seen Volkan just about. He's promoting everything, I think, all across social media in this one. And it's 2 blokes who, we know Dana doesn't like putting 2 wrestlers up against each other, which he started the card with for some reason, but he's finishing it with 2 blokes who love to stand and bang. And I mean, whatever you're going to pay for the price of this. For the price of the card, it's worth it just for this fight alone.
No, mate, we're not a PG show, and just for the non-fight fans, the BMF belt, the baddest mother. It's one of the best named titles in any sport I've ever seen.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's sort of gonna be around for, because let's say Topuria wins this one, is he going to be the BMF belt holder and the obviously the title holder? So if he gets beaten, is it just going to become one title? Like, it's a Yeah, it's one of those ones. It's good for a bit, especially when Masvidal was sort of around the UFC. But look, I think in this one, the key for Max winning in this one, he's got to attack Topuria's legs early and just take away that balance from him and take away that power from his legs. So Volk, Topuria looked probably pretty vulnerable in the first 2 rounds. Volk probably won the first 2 rounds, but then he got caught. And if you just slip up once, you're gone, you're out. And the power he has for the featherweight title, like for the featherweight division, is unbelievable. Probably the hardest hitting boxer that we've seen in this division ever, in my opinion. We've seen some really strong ones come through. I mean, depends which way you want to go. You've obviously got Aldo, you've got Conor McGregor, you've got a lot of ones that have come through. But in terms of pure power, who one hit, walk away, Topuria is probably up there with the best of them.
I think, too, if you look back through his career, and as I said, I'm not nearly as in-depth as you are, but you have a look and his record suggests that he's continued to develop it, and you've only got to watch the power. You know, you go back to his early fights, a lot of his early fights were submissions, then he's built into, you know, staying on his feet, using that power and just continue to develop it. And as you say, it's just lethal. I'm chomping at the bit. I'm not one to watch absolutely every UFC card, but this one, from an Aussie patriotism point of view with Bobby Knuckles into what could just be an absolute stand-up, throwdown brawl. Mate, this is barroom brawling. And, yeah, as you say, he's already turned Alex Volkanovski into an actor. And, mate, yeah, I think Volk and Conor McGregor have got similar levels of acting ability if Roadhouse is anything to go by, but that's a whole other story.
I think so, mate. I think, yeah, look, and it's just talking on Volk there. We'll touch on it quickly. Obviously, it's rumoured that his next fight could be in Sydney. Opponent yet to be known, but if you'd love to see in this one, for me, Max Holloway win, and then that was his boogeyman. Volk was his boogeyman. He just couldn't beat Volk, but all of a sudden it's Volk going in to face Max again as the champion, and it's all of a sudden 3 or 4 years ago when Volk first burst onto the scene with that kind of controversial win, you'd probably say, against Blessed. But for me in this one, I think you're going to know by round 2 who's going to win. If Holloway's pieced up, Topuria's going to finish him inside the 5. Max isn't going to die wondering. He's not going to sit around for a decision finish. But if Topuria's legs are banged up, I'm going to go Max round 4 or 5 to get him. But I don't see this one going the distance one way or another, mate.
Well, we look forward to it. The early hours of Sunday morning. We can't wait. UFC 308, an Aussie flavour, an absolute barroom brawl flavour. What more could you want when it comes to a pay-per-view, Blue? We look forward to it. Broads, that probably wraps up our biffs, mate. We might see if we can find another string to your bow a little later in the show.
Sounds good, mate. Thanks for having me.
Let's roll off from the biffs and in to the bat and ball. The summer of cricket is upon us. You wouldn't know that it's summer just yet, but we're going to dig in to what's happening in the cricket world. And speaking of moving from the biffs, Brody Burrows rejoins me. He's taken off the gloves, the boxing gloves, put on the batting gloves and the cricket helmet, and he's ready for some short action.
Yeah, just leave the chin music alone, mate, and I should be right. I don't have any sort of defence similar to my martial arts career, I think.
Well, the good news for you, mate, is I'm gonna be tossing up some absolute pies, just like my very limited cricket career. So I was a specialist non-bowling, number 11 batting, fielding at fine leg to fine leg sort of character. So good for the vibes, they tell me. But anyway, yeah, that's all right, mate. You can't make a team with 11 of us by the sounds of it. But mate, first of all, I don't like to do this, and I do it begrudgingly, but we have to take our hats off to our Kiwi brethren. They've had a huge week. I don't know if sisterin is the female equivalent of brethren, but it's 2024, so we'll keep rolling with brethren. Why not? They've claimed New Zealand's first World Cup. There was a very sick part of me that wanted to see South Africa win that final just so that we could point out that there was only their men that were chokers, but their women have followed suit, and the Kiwis have dominated, mate. Really strong performance in the final.
Yeah, it was. And obviously all the talk was about South Africa beating Australia in that dominant win in that final, but New Zealand come out. I mean, I think it's, especially when you come to New Zealand, or when you look at New Zealand cricket over time. Yeah, look, mate, I think when you look at New Zealand's population compared to the actual amount of professional sportsmen, we always say Australia bat out the average when it comes to that, but New Zealand do it just as good, if not better, when you look at pure population, I think, mate.
They certainly do. It's been a huge week over there. They took out the America's Cup as well and a bunch of other stuff, a test win in India, but I think the girls winning the T20 World Cup, they'll take away almost $2.5 million US in prize money, which is a nice little reward for their efforts. But the star of it, both with bat and ball, was Ilia, and she performs or provides the perfect segue for us into the WBBL, which gets underway in a few days. She's moved to the Sydney Sixers. Pending fitness, that team could have Ash Gardner, Alyssa Healy, Elise Perry, and Amelia Kerr. They've been a little bit leaner than they were. They dominated the early WBBLs, but they're going to be hard to back against here, Broads.
They are, and what a way to start the WBBL straight off the World Cup as well. We're going to see so many of the stars that dominated in the World Cup coming down to our shores and playing for our teams as well. So I think you're going to see some big crowds. Hopefully, I was lucky enough to be at the Adelaide final, and that was just amazing. And seeing the growth of the game, especially in the past probably 2 or 3 years, where it's gone from smaller grounds to selling out Adelaide Oval at times, and it's been amazing, mate.
It certainly has been. And speaking of Adelaide, it's a nice little double header this Sunday coming. That starts in Adelaide, and it's great to see that they are utilising most of the stadiums. I know previously the Sydney teams haven't got onto the SCG too often, but they're getting that opportunity. There's games at the MCG, Adelaide Oval, obviously Bell Reeve, the Whittaker. So it's great to see them getting to play in the full stadiums, but they're finding the balance between that and then using some of the really picturesque suburban grounds, the North Sydney Ovals, the Drummoyne Ovals, when we use the New South Wales ones to talk about.
Yeah, exactly right. And those grounds are really suited to this kind of cricket as well. We do see some big scores in male and female cricket at those smaller grounds, which if you're coming to the BBL or WBBL, it's what you come to the cricket for, is big hits.
There is a couple of big headline stories which will be interesting. Taylor Vlamic is out, obviously, from that World Cup injury, so that's going to be a hit for the Melbourne Renegades. She missed last season. They had a tough WBBL 09. They finished 8th with just 2 wins. So a lot's going to fall on Hayley Matthews, who's going to probably lead the way as one of their draft selections, with Deandra Dotton as well. As we know, Alyssa Healy carrying that injury in for the Sixers is going to be an interesting one to see how much game time they get out of her. But speaking of injuries as well, Marizanne Kapp's going to be out of action, which is going to throw some added pressure on for the Thunder. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be very much about, who can stay fit. The great thing is they've had the spring challenge. Hobart managed to win that, which is a great precursor for those players not playing. So we're going to see lots of players who are in form because they've had a good taste of T20 cricket. So we're certainly, the more domestic cricket and the fact that it's starting before summer actually starts, I've certainly got no complaints.
No, definitely no complaints here. And I think one thing that we've seen, it's not so much the stars that have brought home the championships for their franchises. It's actually been the depth that you just talked about. And it's whoever has 11 contributors. And we often see, like Adelaide as well, I think they had 20s, 30s, as well as, they're always going to have the stars and that lead the way. But it's it's 11 players that make up a side. And we've seen the stars don't always, that's a bit of a pun, don't always bring home the bacon, mate.
No, they certainly don't always bring home the bacon in both formats, the men's and the women's WBBL, and very rarely, if the fact's correct. But speaking of the summer of cricket that's kicked off before summer has started, the Sheffield Shield is into its second round 2 matches around the country underway as we speak. They're wrapping up pretty much as we go live and release this episode of the show, Broads. There's lots of key takeaways. There were some really good performers in the first round of the Shield that they were expecting maybe to back up in the second. There probably hasn't been a lot of consistency. There's been a bit of up and down. What are your key takeaways so far from the Sheffield Shield and what we've seen?
Look, round 1, we saw 3 draws. In round 2, we could see 3 results, but don't want to speak too early. But look, there's been some stars. There's been some disappointments. And, I mean, we've seen some of the Australians, the test side. We've seen Steve Smith come in and probably fail a little bit. Marnus looked good until just holding out to a pretty easy dismissal, which you don't see often from him. And Mitch Stark, it just looks like a bowling round, this one.
It certainly does. We've seen some good bowling from Nisa as well. We've seen some interesting pieces. Tom Whitney on debut, and nothing like an overreaction. And we'll get to maybe not an overreaction, but certainly a pump up of the tyres of a young gun when it comes to the Test arena potentially. But Tom Whitney, 5 wickets on debut, 5 for 57 from 19 overs. We'll just roll him straight into the Test side, surely.
The thing is, I think you can make 100 once as a batter, and especially if you're from New South Wales, and get a gig straight away. But as a bowler, mate, I think you have to take about 400 Sheffield Shield wickets before even getting in the squad.
Yeah, you got to be the Mike Hussey equivalent these days as a bowler. But again, he's backed it up. He's got 3 wickets in the second innings, 1 wicket still to fall as we record. So a solid debut would be a name to watch. Mate, you touched on Marnus, speaking of bowlers, and mate, he's a genuine medium pacer now. He's got almost as many all-round abilities as Matthew Wade. Will we see him take the keeping gloves next?
Oh, imagine him behind the stumps. You just want to turn around and belt him, wouldn't you?
Earplugs. You'd have there's noise-cancelling headphones under your helmet.
No, I couldn't do it. Him under the lid or him with the keeping gloves. I think I'd rather just be sitting on the sidelines as 12th man running out the drinks.
Mate, I reckon you'd have people refusing to field in the slips.
It'd be him and no one would chase his spies either, I don't reckon.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. The other game, and you touched on Steve Smith, takeaways from the New South Wales Vic game. We saw some really positive things in terms of Sheffield Shield cricket. We don't see many crowds, but there was queues for tickets for the game. Yeah,
it was great to see, wasn't it, mate? And it wasn't just like your normal game. You heard the crowd celebrating, not just the players in this one. And I mean, even it wasn't just the current Test stars in this one that were sort of really paying attention to. You had Marcus Harris, who's really vying for that spot. He's thrown the selectors under the bus a few times with some of his comments over the last year or two. And I think you look at this one, and there's a lot of young stars that are coming up through. I mean, Campbell Kellaway, and you're going to touch on one in a minute too, and Will Sutherland. Since he's taken the captaincy for the Vics, his batting's gone out, and he's not taking quite as many wickets as what he was either.
Well, no, Sutherland with a pair in this game, certainly interesting. No one's really covered themselves in glory. It's almost a race to the bottom, which is almost appropriate. The man that's at the centre of a lot of this is the young gun, Sam Constas. He got some real solid runs in the first round. Hasn't been able to back that up, but again, as we said, no one really covering themselves in glory in this game. A 43 probably adds a little bit more positivity, but he's young. Is he ready? We'll talk about that in a moment. But how have we seen his performances so far?
Yeah, look, his game against South Australia was absolutely outstanding. He did get dropped quite early in that one, which I think a lot of people are forgetting. And if you're playing international cricket, that one, there's no way that's getting dropped. But look, he's great. It's great to have this young talent that we can now pay attention to and probably put more eyes on the Sheffield Shield when we look at it. We've got the likes of him, Campbell Kellaway. I love the look of him, probably more as a short format player at this stage of his career. But I think 3 or 4 years down the track, we're going to see him in the green and gold as well. There's a lot of Nathan McSweeney too. I think he's going to be a future player for a long time in that Australian side. But yeah, look, when it comes to Sam Constas, mate, great performer. Don't think he's ready for the Test arena yet, mate. I think he's too raw. If he was a chicken, I reckon I'd send him back.
Oh, there it is. A little bit of pink chicken for Sam Constas. The last one before we move on from the Shield, mate, a couple of spin shows, Murphy and Rockakoli, both, doing pretty well at the moment, which is, a positive for the future of Aussie cricket.
Love the story of Rockakoli, mate. I'm glad you touched on it. Is 3 or 4 years ago, he was playing second and thirds and was barely making the team for that. And then all of a sudden, he just kept at his craft. I think he's actually a cricket coach on the side. So when he's not playing, he's doing that for a job. I'm pretty sure. So if you it's getting paid to do it both ways, I suppose. But yeah, I love Rockakoli. I think he's one that just reminds me of Nathan Lyon. Things hasn't always gone his way, but he's just grinding himself into that spot. And I think soon enough, he's just going to force the selectors to pick him, especially when we do go to the subcontinent. You touched on Todd Murphy. It's great to see him back. Obviously had some injury issues. And I mean, if we get him back, get Rockakoli going, Lyon, I mean, he's going to play to his 50 or 60 by the way that he's going, mate. So, look, spin in Australia, it's looking good. Just wouldn't mind a leg spinner coming through the ranks at some stage.
We always want more. That's one thing that's for sure. And the one thing we will get is plenty more cricket across the summer. We touched on Sam Constas. We might have a bit more of a thought and dig into that battle for the opening spot and what the Test makeup looks like as we move forward. There's going to be a lot of questions and, just like the Test opening batting battle, why not bring in someone else into the mix? Let's get Lachie Avil on board, our regular reappearing star. Lachie alongside us. Mate, Loch, how do you see this shaping up in terms of the Test openers battle? What are your thoughts on what we've seen so far and who lines up in the pole position?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. Hello. I hope you're going well, mate. Of course, all this has started from Cam Green, right? So out for 6 months with surgery on his lower back, and then that's opened up the number 4 spot. And a lot of people are saying, and Steve Smith, even himself, saying potentially he'll be the one to drop down the order. And then, as you say, that opens up that spot at the top of the order. So, you've got Travis Head and Mitch Marsh in the team who, can do a bit of bowling as well. So in terms of Cameron Green exiting, they can really focus on that pure batsman. And you say, that's the real question. And it's tricky. I don't think there's a real standout option. You got some regulars who have been in the side before in terms of Marcus Harris and Cameron Bancroft. Obviously, you talked about Constas there as well. Getting out to Scott Boland at the MCG is nothing to, shy away from. That's never a bad thing. But plenty of people putting their hands up. It will be interesting to see which direction they choose to go.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We obviously saw Dave Warner retire, at the end of the last winter. He made that clear, the last summer. I'll get my seasons right in a moment. He had that Sydney farewell. It shaped up really interestingly in terms of would Steve Smith continue to open once he filled in that spot. He's made it clear that's not what he wanted to do. The Cameron Green things made things really easy in terms of the transition. But as Brody touched on before, we've got the Sam Constas piece. We've got, Cameron Bancroft maybe in the mix. Marcus Harris, they've been there, done that. Do we move, as you said, Mitch Marsh or Travis Head to the opening position? There's a lot of things that we're going to unravel as we head to the Border Gavaskar Trophy. There's also the question mark on different decks to, moving one of those all-rounders up. Does that open up the spot for Michael Neser, who we've seen perform? I don't know that we've got any answers, but if you're George Bailey and you're pulling the strings, where are you going with this? What's your call on it?
I would leave the all-rounders where they are, to be honest. I know we've seen Travis Head come up the order before and do a job, and potentially, if the selectors saw David Warner's exit at kind of creating a hole in that kind of attacking, explosive player up the top of the order, then, Travis Head would fit that bill. But I reckon when you leave him where you are, he and Mitch Marsh have done exceptional for the Test team over the last year or so. So I think you're just bringing in a straight-up opener. It's a really tough question. Constas is obviously the youngest. He has a big future ahead of him. Marcus Harris has had his chances, maybe never quite proved himself, and Cameron Bancroft jumping in and out. So I'd probably go the young one, Constas. That'd be my tip. I think, it's a either throwing him into the deep end against India. A Border Gavaskar Trophy is tough, but yeah, that'd be my tip.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? There's such a youth piece there that, is he ready if you throw him in too early? I just don't know. It's a tough ask to come and bat against India. It's obviously on the Australians' deck, so that gives you that advantage. But I wonder, and I'll go to you in a moment, Broads, in terms of your thoughts on this. I wonder, do we go to that experience? But again, as you touched on before, Brody, Marcus Harris, Cameron Bancroft, they've had their chances and for different reasons have progressed back out of the side. So is youth the best policy, or is there someone, as a left field solution that we might be missing?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? No one's jumping off the page saying, pick me in this one. Sam Constas, I think he is going to be an opener 2 or 3 years' time down the track. I think at the moment, if you're going to pick someone in form, there's no one. Like, you sort of have to pick from someone within. And Travis Head, I don't think I don't think he's the option up top. He's saved Australia's bacon way too many times. Leave him where he is. Same as Mitch Marsh. Don't want to see him open. I mean, Henry Hunt, he's your typical player who can come up if needed and really grind out, if it's tough conditions overseas. He's happy being 70 off 300 balls if needed, which I think we need someone else like that, with Khawaja. It's not often, especially with our bowling attack, that matches are going to go the full 5 days. I think sometimes our openers, especially with Warner, probably his last 2 years, it could be a little bit overly aggressive, really set us up. Then all of a sudden, we're not 1 down, we're 4 down for 42 in tricky conditions. So I wouldn't mind seeing probably a more defensive-minded sort of opener coming to the side. I'd probably be leaning towards a Henry Hunt, even a Sam Constas if he is going to do it. But I wouldn't be bringing him in against India. I'd be throwing him a gimme when or try and get West Indies to tour next, or the year after the Ashes, and bring him in at that stage.
That one-off test that we owe Afghanistan might be the solution for him. But I like Henry Hunt as well. And mate, I know you're a parochial. You can't call them redbacks anymore. A parochial Saka man. I like Hunt as well. Probably a little bit longer proliferation of results on the board. And I think too in this T20 era, we've gone so focused on ensuring that, we score runs, and we forget the traditional role of the opener, especially when you've got Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne, or Labuschagne as we like to call him. I like to throw that in every now and then, a bit of South African. And then, you go down to Travis Head and co, Mitch Marsh. We've got plenty of runs in the bank. Even Carey's been in pretty good form. We saw that in the first round of the Sheffield Shield. So that opportunity is there, I think, to have a very traditional opener who just takes the shine off the ball and means that our number 4 or 5 isn't coming in at 3 for 9 like lots of other test nations are. And, that's the predominant solution. Usman can turn over the strike, he can rotate, he can get runs on the board. He's a very stylish player, and I think that would perform a really good balance against India. He's got a bit more experience. So, that's two of us saying Henry Hunt. So that probably means Henry Hunt's absolutely no chance. And maybe Brody's tip of TBA is the way to go. But we will know more as we head to the Border Gavaskar Trophy. We've got the White Ball series coming soon. It's going to be the focus first, and we'll get into that. But we'll close out the cricket. We'll take a little bit of a break, and we'll come back with some more sporting action as we spread our eyes across the Australian sporting landscape. Well, we move on to the round ball action. The A-Leagues are underway, round 1 behind us, and who else would join us but the returning Round Ball Australia host, Lachie Avil. A bit more of a formal introduction now that we're into your wheelhouse.
Absolutely, mate. This is my zone. Let's do it.
Let's get into it. Well, as I said, round 1 behind us, the biggest talking point was the introduction and entry into the competition of the new side, Auckland FC, and no one summed up their entry any better than Sky Sports' Jason Pine.
It has been 18 long years since professional footballers called Auckland home. The pioneering football kings and the ill-fated New Zealand Knights are just a distant memory for most in this part of the world. And for a long time, it seemed that never again would Auckland have a football team to follow, a side to support, a club to call its own. But from their long ago extinguished embers, driven by the vision and resources of its owners, the knowledge and know-how of its football department, and the commitment and drive of its players, professional football today returns to the city of Sails. The beautiful game is back in New Zealand's largest region. The dark days of the...
Well, as I said, I don't think anyone could sum it up better than Piney and that illustrious, very distinct accent of his, Lachie. It was a overwhelmingly successful debut for the Black Knights on a number of fronts.
Yeah, correct. It was a spectacular day. They came very close to breaking the record for the biggest crowd for an A-League team's first game. Only some health and safety violations got in the way of them tipping that particular record, I think. But it was exceptional. They filled out the stadium. The atmosphere was amazing, which for a new club you just don't see. And credit to all the Auckland people that came out and supported them. This game and this season, this team has been hyped up ever since they were announced. But credit to the ownership as well, Bill Foley and the Knights Sports Group and everyone involved in the organisation of the club, because you can't just plop a team down in a region in Australia or New Zealand and expect people to turn up. We've seen that go wrong before many times in the A-League. But they got around the local community. They brought in some really great talent. They've nailed some visa signings, some internationals, and they've really created a great community sense around the club. And that's why I think it was so successful on day one. And they got a win as well, which was even better.
It certainly was. It was a great start to their appearance in the competition, and we'll have a look at what's next for the Black Knights a little bit later on when we dig into round 2. But there's plenty of talking points out of round 1, and again, I want to remind everyone that we're not going to go chapter and verse on the A-Leagues. We are going to take out the big talking points and try and pick them apart. If you want to dig chapter and verse, Lachie hosts Round Ball Australia. They've already got the recap out. There'll be a preview episode coming. There's some live watch-alongs for some football we'll talk about in a little bit. So if you want to get in a little bit deeper, then Round Ball Australia is the place to go. But in the meantime, mate, the Sydney Derby, it delivered as well. Speaking of headlines, Auckland only just pipped them in terms of the big talking point. Juan Mata, Douglas Costa were the big talking points coming into it. And certainly, delivered plenty of excitement this match and also a bumper crowd.
Yeah, bumper crowd, absolutely. Combank Stadium sold out. I'm not sure if the Wanderers have actually done that before. That'll be a stat check for you. But, exceptional. Both ends packed out, the RBB and the Cove and full voice. Just an amazing atmosphere. And I've seen plenty of people joking about it online. Douglas Costa, One Mata coming in for their first A-League game. They're going to get a real shock when they head out to Tarneed in a couple of weeks and only discover a few thousand people on the fence. But, that's A-League football for you, right? It was a tremendous occasion and, we should celebrate it for what it was. And it's one of the marquee fixtures of the season. And it was an exceptional game. One Mata not quite there at full fitness. Stajic told the press post-game, just didn't want to waste him in the first 30 when the game was going to be up and hyper. So he came on for the last 30 instead. Still made an impression. Douglas Costa was exceptional, as we've seen. We've seen a few outings from him now in a Sydney FC shirt. He is really looking the goods. And, of course, a lot of the questions that we have of marquees when they come over is that they just bring in the name or can they actually still play a little bit of football? And Douglas Costa definitely can still play a little bit of football. So, Sydney FC is shaping up to be real competitors for the league this year, and having him in the heart of that team is going to be very exciting to watch. Yeah,
well, it's certainly an interesting piece, and he embraced the peak A-Leagues elements in the celebrations afterwards, riding around on a packing trolley.
Yeah, classic. I mean, it's just one of these moments, and I said on our pod, having Douglas Costa and One Mata, two European giants, headlined in the A-League is a bit foreign, but, we still have, Douglas Costa rolling around on a trolley. We still have a slide at Auckland for the kids to be going down as the football's going on. And we have another moment that I'm sure you're going to bring up in a second as well over in Gosford. It's just peak A-League is back, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
I think it was fitting for the 20th season, and I think it probably reflects really well on how he's lent straight into Sydney. We've seen some other marquees that have come before and refused to take flights, even though they signed with a team that was 2.5 hours from anyone else on a plane. But anyway, that's a whole other story for another, maybe a Chris Macpherson show up late or something when we can just rabbit on for a little. One of the big talking points too, MacArthur, there was question marks. Last time they won the Australia Cup, would they deliver? Did they deliver? Did Perth not turn up? Did Perth remember to get off the flight? What happened in Western Sydney?
Yeah, look, I am high-ish on the Bulls this year. I think they'll play finals football. But for me, this result was so much more about Perth being rubbish. They turned up. Obviously, it's tough. It is tough to travel away from Perth, but they clearly came into the game underdone. That just the coordination wasn't there. And David Zrilic, for those who don't know, he's had a coaching upbringing in the Red Bull football system. They like to press very hard and in very specific ways, in very complex ways as well. That's probably often missed. It's not just about running as hard as you can at the other team with the ball. You got to do it in some very specific ways and in some patterns that probably weren't properly learnt by the Perth Glory, and they were torn apart. There were, in 5 goals in the first half, and some of those towards the end of the 45, just standing on their heels, the defenders, and just allowing things to happen around them. And they've had a lot of playing turnover, a lot of young, raw players that will be an advantage for Driller in the long term because he'll be able to coach the way he wants to play into them. But early off, not good signs at all. They were all over the place.
They certainly were all over the place. And I think you guys touched on your most recent episode. You had a package together and a clip from one of the Perth Glory podcasts where they talked about the way they finished their away games last year. And again, I think it was an 8-0 and a 7-1 loss to Melbourne City and Sydney respectively. It's concerning. We know it's tough to travel from Perth, but it's not a new thing for them. They're going to have to find a way around that really quickly if they don't want to be written off early in the season.
Yeah, and I really worry about how damaging this loss can be for the mentality of the side. As you say, they lost their last 2 games of last season by maybe 6 and 7 goals, something like that. And then they come and lose 6-1 in the first game of the season. And you spend so long, it's a very long A-League off season in comparison to world football. And every day you're thinking, okay, it's a new season. Everyone's on zero. We get to train, we get to practice, we get to work hard and hopefully have a better campaign next time around. And then all of a sudden, 1 round later, you're not on zero anymore. Your negative goal difference is 4 or 5 or whatever. You're down the bottom, you're 13th on the ladder. It feels like you're doing the same thing all over again. So, I'm worried for them.
Well, we'll have a look at what's next for Perth again when we pick into round 2 shortly. It would be remiss of us. We built it up last week. We talked about the grand final rematch, how exciting it was. if I told someone who hadn't watched the game that there was torrential rain, there was a penalty that came off the goalpost that was questionable, there was a red card downgraded to a yellow card upgraded to a red that barely was almost not a yellow card before that, you would have thought it was enthralling. But realistically, our grand final rematch on Friday night, the crowd was probably fitting for what they got in the end, but the biggest talking point, as you said, was peak A-Leagues.
Great tackle, Moragas on Kisnorbo. Is he going to ask for the video review of that one?
I think we were waiting to see if we were going to get Cosmina Musket Mark II.
So good.
How do you describe that? How can you predict that? I know that a lot of the benches in the A-League are, at some of these stadiums right on the touchline. We don't have the wonderful dugouts and things of the EPL and, the Premier levels of these comforts. But again, and we know that Patrick Kisnorbo is not described as the calmest cat. That looked like it was a tinderbox ready to go off, but somehow didn't. But my goodness, it was entertaining.
Oh, absolutely entertaining. And to answer your question about how do you describe it as the A-League. That's exactly what it's all about. And Patrick Kisnorbo just kind of, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and picked him off the ground like nothing happened. I'm sure the side of his shirt was a little bit wet and uncomfortable for the remainder of the game. But he seemed to just brush it off quite quickly. But in terms of the game, you're right. A few interesting moments, but a 0-0 grand final rematch to start the season wasn't exactly what we were looking for. But the red card as well to Roderick Miranda really changed the game. Victory had the best of it until then, and then they went down to 10 and they were just trying to hold on. And the Mariners, for all they tried in the last 30 minutes, couldn't get the breakthrough.
They certainly couldn't. It probably touches on briefly, though, there was lots of questions in the lead up to this game around the Mariners goalkeeping, and we saw this eventuate across the league. It's been a story of senior citizen goalkeepers at different points over the history of the A-League. I'm thinking Mark Bosnich, I'm thinking Liam Reddy multiple times. I'm thinking lots of these guys. Even Danny Vukovic was well into his 30s before he hung up the gloves last year. But we've seen the emergence of another generation. We know about Alex Paulson. We talked about him last week. But some names we probably didn't know or weren't as familiar with certainly made their mark on the weekend, and the Mariners were one to find one.
Absolutely, yeah. Young Dylan Perrett-Cullen came in. They've picked up Pavlicic from Sydney FC. This is the Mariners in the off-season who we kind of thought might be their number one. He had quite a poor outing in the Champions League a couple of weeks ago. So Dylan PC came in and did an exceptional job, really made his mark. And I think, trying to gauge the sentiment of Mariners fans, they definitely see him as their preference moving forward. So he's definitely made an impression. You got Tristan Vidakovic, who came in for the Wanderers this week for the injured Lawrence Thomas. Not an easy scenario to make your senior debut in a Sydney derby. He was exceptional. I know they lost the game 2-1, but he really kept them in it at moments. And then we have the very interesting case of Patrick Beach at Melbourne City. And this change wasn't out of necessity. They have Jamie Young sitting there on the bench, who is a stalwart of the league for over 10 years and is an A-League champion. And Aurelio Vidmar and his staff decided, no, we're actually going to back the youngster. And he was the man of the match for me against the Newcastle Jets. They won the game 1-0. His shot stopping was really good. He was very comfortable and calm and composed on the ball. They asked him to come outside of his box and essentially join a back three with his centre-back pairing, and he did that with ease. And so that was very impressive for me to see him slot into that role so comfortably. But yeah, three goalkeepers there that, whether through necessity or choice, have come in to the starting sides this week and have really put their hands up with some solid performances.
I noticed in your article about Beach on Roundball Australia, you didn't go with my suggested headline of youth over young. I thought that would have been nice. You know that I like alliteration. We saw that with the piece I popped up around Dobson's debut. But anyway, on for another time. Let's shift our attention, and the Mariners are probably a really perfect segue into A-League round 2. There's probably a bigger game to talk about, which we'll get into in a moment. But we get our first look at Adelaide on Saturday afternoon. They're at home to the Mariners. As you said, the Mariners, coming off the treble, haven't been finding winning easy, and they're going to have a tough time getting to Adelaide as well.
Yeah, they will. The context that you refer to is that they've got a game in China midweek in the AFC Champions League Elite against Shanghai Port, who's actually coached by Kevin Muscat, a very famous Australian player, of course. So they're flying at the moment. They've had a couple of losses recently, but are sitting at the top of the Chinese Super League. So that's going to be a very tricky game. Of course, they've travelled there directly from Auckland. Sorry, no, that's Sydney FC. My bad. The other Asian competition, but the Mariners, have to go away and then come back to Adelaide. First game of the season, they're going to have that advantage of playing in front of a home crowd at Hindmarsh. Fresh optimism for a new season. They're going to find that really tough, I think. And the Mariners lost a lot of players in the off season. They're struggling to deal with that. And I don't see this game as the one where they're able to respond. I definitely lean towards Adelaide as the favourites.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. It's a good opportunity, as you say, for Adelaide to lay the platform. And look, if I can dish out any advice to the Mariners, Lucas Moragas, maybe don't slide into the opposition coach on midweek. He may have a little bit of a different reaction from previous history.
Absolutely.
Speaking of Kevin Muscat, it turns us into Melbourne. The Melbourne derby, this one's always a good one. Saturday night, Melbourne victory away to Melbourne City. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who's home. It's just which change room they're in. There'll be a huge victory dominance in the crowd, I expect, here, and they'll head in full of confidence. City as strong as they were, I think Victory are probably the favourites here.
Yeah, it's tricky. I've actually wrestled on this one quite a bit because, Melbourne Victory looked so impressive in pre-season in the Australia Cup. But when you look back at it in retrospect, the games that they won and dominated were against NPL opposition. They barely squeaked past Adelaide in the semi-final, and they've lost to Macarthur and drawn to the Central Coast since then. So they actually get to prove themselves against some quality A-League teams. And Melbourne City, who I didn't think a whole lot of coming into the season, actually I thought looked quite good against the Jets. So I actually have this one sitting pretty even. I could see a low-scoring draw. Melbourne Victory have been plagued as this team that can have a lot of the ball and not score many goals. And then I think City look quite organised. So, look, the atmosphere is always great. Hopefully they can sell out AAMI Park. You'd hope with the optimism of a new season. I know ticket sales maybe weren't tracking too great coming into this week. But, of course, the APL had the Sydney Derby to market, and now they're pushing the Melbourne Derby. So it'll be interesting to see how many people they get in the stands, but hopefully it can be a good game.
Certainly looks like promising on the cover, that's for sure. We move on. The other one that I want to just quickly pull apart, and then we'll fire off onto the last three games just for some thoughts and tips. The Corica Cup, Steve Corica hosts his former side in Sydney FC. Sydney will head into this as the bookies' favourite. But Auckland still riding that wave of momentum, and I'm sure Steve Corica would love nothing more than bragging rights over the club that released him not that long ago.
I'm sure he would. Yes, absolutely. And you're probably right. Sydney are probably going to go into every game they play at the moment as favourites. But Auckland are a real wild card. Lots of new players to the league. Obviously, we've only seen them play one competitive game as a group together. So it's really hard to gauge where they're at. But they did look very impressive. And I know not a lot of people rate Brisbane Roar too much this year, but a solid 2-0 result at home in terms of, the football aspect of it. Again, I think this one could be really close. Auckland at home, they've really nailed their visa signings, and both of these teams have done that. It's not just Douglas Costa. They've really got some quality. And Sydney FC's is probably their front four, and then Auckland's is probably their back four. They've got Alex Paulson, of course, who's a Kiwi in goal, but then you've got DeVry and Sakai, two internationals who flank the defence, and then Dan Hall's an Aussie. So. Some really exciting players in that game. I think they're going to be two of the better teams in the competition.
I think I'm going to pick you up there. I won't do this often through the season, but I think Dan Hall's technically a Fijian, but that's all right. He's a Fijian Aussie, maybe.
Well, under the visa rules of the A-League and player eligibility, he's considered definitely an Australian.
Yeah, well, you take it whatever the way the accounting works for the salary cap and visa slots, right? And then the last three, we've got the Jets and Macarthur. It'll be an interesting one, but not much of a storyline there. You think Macarthur would be reasonable favourites. I don't think there's too much to pick apart. Yeah, maybe not. But, Macarthur winning the Cup and then having such a dominant win in round one, it would just make perfect sense in the first month of the A-League to then go and lose against the Jets at home. So you never know. You never know in this wild league. I look forward to it. We'll have a double dose of Roundball Australia coverage in person, though. Myself and Poletti will be there. So we're looking forward to that. That'll be good fun. The OG Distance Derby, Wellington, they might have to travel 1,000,000 miles, but they'd have to be reasonably confident of seeing what Perth dished up in week one. Yeah, look, obviously travel this far is always difficult, but I don't think many people will be tipping Perth to get near this one. Italiano has brought in a lot of new players to Wellington. He said post-match the other day that he's given his side 4 to 6 weeks for them to really start gelling and put together the kind of performances that he was looking for. But, yeah, against this inexperienced Perth side, you can't bet against Wellington here. You certainly can't. The last one could be the way out west, the James Rain Cup, the best of the West. Western United hosting Western Sydney Wanderers. This one is going to certainly be an interesting one. You touched on it, Ironbark Fields. One Mata won't know what's hitting.
Yeah, exactly. It's the contradiction. I love it. Heading out there, the one or two stands and the open fields around is definitely a different look to Combank Stadium. It's just the beauty of the A-League, isn't it? This one's hard to tell as well. Wanderers look all right. I think they're going to be around a mid-table team this year, maybe a little bit higher depending on how they go. And Western, haven't really improved a lot from quite a poor performance last year. They brought in Hiroshi Ibasuki up top, who will score probably 8 to 10 goals, something like that. Another hard one to pick. It's never easy in the A-League.
Never easy. I like that you're sitting on the fence there. That's brilliant, mate. But that will wrap the A-League. As always, if you want some more A-League content, roundballaustralia.com.au, the Roundball Australia podcast. You can find it on all your good podcast channels, YouTube and all the social media as well. Get around it. You may even, at some point in the coming weeks, see a rare appearance of the illustrious Chris Macpherson on there. I will pop in occasionally, but the one thing you will see is Lachie Avil almost always, and you'll get some in-depth A-League content. So thank you, as always, Lachie, and congratulations on cap number 2 on episode 002.
Thanks, mate. I'm tied with the host, that means, right?
You are, mate. You're our leading cap getter equal.
Love it.
As we did in episode 1, let's close out the show with some high-octane drama. The F1 Carnival continues on. We're joined by our motorsport maestro, our producer behind the scenes, JR. Welcome back. And like Lachie, mate, cap number 2 on screen.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's good to be back. Formula 1 on the weekend was a bit of a Ferrari show. From the opening stages, Leclerc and Sainz just both began to dominate to the point where after the first set of stops, we didn't really see much of them during the broadcast.
Yeah, well, they ran away with it, as you say. There was some battles going behind, which we'll get into in a minute. And it livens things up. Look, Lando Norris had some drama, might be an understatement. I'm sure he's pointing some fingers, but how do we pull that apart? What's going on with Lando?
Look, in terms of Lando, we've seen a classic Lando from pole start. He does not have a great strike rate when he's sitting at pole. He very rarely leads into the first corner. And once again, Lando starting from pole, just to take a look at what the internet's sort of been saying about it, how could Oscar Piastri do this? Oscar not involved in any way, shape or form, but that's sort of how Lando goes. Later in the race, got himself into a bit of a battle with Max Verstappen, which did result in a 5-second penalty that Lando was very upset about. Max was pretty pleased about it because that put him into the podium places.
Yeah, well, that's it. Lando crossed the line in third. Then we had the penalty applied. Advantage Max now, and we talked about it last week. It could be the sweetest victory for Danny Rick in terms of the way it plays out. Max Verstappen takes another small advantage in this death by 1,000 cuts race that happens over the final, half dozen races from here.
He does. He does pick up handy points and also picking up the victory in the sprint race the night before. Or should I say morning before, given how early these broadcasts have been. A couple of big things to take away, though. Perez still not performing. But sort of back in the back grid again. Liam Lawson on debut showing some stuff already. Even though Danny Rick left him the nice little present of, hey, here's a 20-place grid penalty because of a new engine. Liam was able to perform during qualifying the night before, or should I say the Friday before, he was as high as third place during Q2. To the point where in Q1, but to the point where they actually prevented Liam from completing laps in case he knocked Yuki out of qualifying. So Liam, on debut, something to look at there. But Perez, again, not really doing much. But that leads us into next race, which is Perez's home race of Mexico.
It will be. Before we get to Mexico, I do want to just touch on Liam Lawson. That was the cherry on the cake that was the Kiwi sporting prowess. We talked about it all before, and it was the one that I held off mentioning. Points in his first race as the official holder of that seat. So, it's interesting to see what he can do from here. But as you said, Sergio Perez, if there's a time to step up, turn up and shine, if he can't do it in downtown Mexico, where can he do it?
Look, and he has to do it quickly because now the grip is close, or the grip is loosening on his hold of that seat now. If Lawson continues to perform, and admittedly that was a track that the RB car was suited to, and I'd almost argue there's a reason why Danny was out before Austin, because I feel that Danny may have performed in a similar way, but Perez needs to step up in Mexico.
He certainly does. We'll watch and wait. We won't have to wait long because the next race is this weekend. It'll be Monday at the early hours for us Aussies. But we wait with bated breath to see what delivers. The race is certainly still alive between Lando and Max, and there's lots of other storylines, as they do in the F1, JR, continuing to marinate and eventuate.
Absolutely.
Well, a big thank you to Brody Burrows, to Lachie Avil, to JR Carter as well. A big thank you to you for tuning in. Episode 002 in the books. We love your feedback. Make sure to shoot it through to us via any of our social media or via the YouTube channel. And we look forward to talking all things sport under the Australian umbrella and more broadly next week.